Greetings, school directors and friends of public education. Thanks so much for being here today. It is Thursday, April 3rd. As I mentioned earlier, it's a holiday for me. It's my best friend's birthday. We've been friends for 35 years and we're only 10 days apart. So I'm excited about it. I don't know if you are, but one thing you should be excited about is the fact that we have successfully managed to survive 81 days of the 2025 legislative session, and we've got 24 left. Those are hard-earned 81 days of a legislative session, and the next 24 may prove to be the same. Although I will tell you that a lot of the conversations and the work that will be consequential to public education are happening behind closed doors right now as the budget negotiating team is determining which cuts are going to land in the final proposal, which taxes, if any, might get in there too, and therefore how do they balance the budget, address the funding shortfall that has been projected for the next 2 and 4 year outlook, and then hopefully also as a part of that conversation, almost fully fund special education, at least partially fund MSOC. We don't know where we're going to land in that mix. Could be good, could be difficult, but we'll keep you posted as we know. My guess is that we won't know until closer to the end of session. So in the meantime, we'll be providing you with pertinent information, important information, either myself or some of our colleagues in the field. The capital budget was released this week. And so our foremost expert in that space is Tyler Muench. He's the Director of Advocacy and External Affairs with OSPI. Sorry, I forgot to add that indicator there in the agenda. But I just learned from him he's running a little bit behind schedule. Actually, he's running behind schedule because his Zoom is crashing. Perhaps you can relate and we can give him grace as we've all been there and done that. So to give him a little time to navigate that, Jim, do you mind stepping in at this point so that he can navigate that and you can deliver your content in the meantime? How do you feel about that, Jim?
No, I don't mind at all.
Okay, great. Well, I'm going to stop share. I think I already gave you some share abilities, and I hope all of you already know Jim Kowalkowski, the director of the Rural Education Center. He is a strong friend and partner, and one of my favorite testifiers on the Hill. We highlighted some of that work at an earlier in-session live, and he's back to give us a sort of what's going on with small and rural school districts as it relates to the legislature and specific policy issues that might be of interest to you. So I'm going to shut up now, Jim, and turn off my screen and let you run it.
Thanks, Marissa. Appreciate it. And shout out to all of you school board directors. I think it's a very important position that you hold, and the work you do is honorable and it does help kids. And thank you for that work. I was a superintendent for 23 years. I was blessed to work with outstanding school directors, all kind of different personalities, different viewpoints, which actually made the work more beautiful. And just keep the focus on what you can do in your district to help your kids be as successful as they can. I'm going to highlight a couple of things. Marissa asked me to talk about some things impacting small rural districts, but some things I'm going to talk about could impact all of you as this session sort of winds down. The big wind up before the wind down. And as Marissa said, a lot of the work's going to be done behind closed doors. Um, it's a little bit hard to read here, but Yogi Berra, it ain't over till it's over. The session's not over till it's over. We've got the House and Senate budget proposals, but they're together in some ways, far apart in others. We will not know until the final budget is approved and sent to the governor of what is really going to happen. And another saying from Yogi Berra, nickel ain't worth a dime anymore. You can go crazy thinking about that, but I think the reason I mentioned that is the impact of inflation is impacting all school districts. For example, MSOCs for sure. And Yogi Berra, the great philosopher. So just a couple of bills I'm going to talk about. Senate Bill 5009. Some of you may have owned it if you're a little bit older like me, one of these VW vans. But this bill would allow you a district to use a vehicle other than a school bus to transport kids to and from school and get transportation dollars from, and also for first time ever to get depreciation for a vehicle other than a yellow school bus. You probably know if your district purchases vans or Suburbans or school cars, those are either levy money, maybe it's CTE money. In most cases, it's levy dollars. States never provided funding for that. So this is a game changer here. Seattle School District is interested in this bill, and this would impact all school districts. There is some training required of employees who that would drive kids to and from school, or and in those cases, they would be subject to random drug tests and have to get some training, but not the CDL that bus drivers need to have. It passed the Senate 49 to nothing. It's in the House and it's scheduled for a hearing Saturday morning. I'm scheduled to, I signed in to testify pro. And then it's also always a good sign when they've got the executive session already scheduled for April 7th, which I think that's Monday. So I have an 8 ball here. My prediction on this is this bill will pass. We tried last session. It's a bipartisan bill sponsored by Senator Braun, but also co-signed by Senator Wellman, and it's got Republicans, Democrats. I think it's a really good bill. Is it would give districts an option. Another bill we're watching for Class 2 districts. This was a bill that was passed several years ago following COVID. um, the supply of, as you know, supply of substitute teachers is limited. Administrators, especially for small rural districts, sometimes hard to find, especially need somebody part-time. We've got a lot of talented people that have retired, but still want to help, still have the fire in the belly, as I testified a few weeks ago in one of the committees. Folks that are retired are allowed, normally it's 867 hours. That's for all districts. But for Class 2, it's been increased to 1,040. So this could be for an administrator, it could be for a substitute teacher, a bus driver. And that language sunset in the original bill sunsets July 1st of this year. There's 2 bills that have been working their way through both the House and the Senate. They're very similar in language. The only difference is the sunset date. The House bill, sponsored by Representative Chase, would extend the date 2 more years. The Senate bill would extend it actually to 2030. I believe that bill is sponsored by Senator Wellman. You can see both bills have had great support in both the House and the Senate. And again, Marissa, I know has explained this to all of you. When a bill finally passes the legislature, the wording has to be identical to this House and Senate versions, or there has to be one bill that both the House and Senate vote on the floor, the exact same wording. So the 1936 bill is scheduled for executive session April 8th. That's Monday, I think, or Tuesday. And then it's a public hearing this Saturday. And then the 5738 already had the public hearing, and it's scheduled for executive session April 5th, which is Saturday. And my 8 ball prediction on that, that's the one you shake and look at, it tells you the answer, is that I think it will, one of these will pass. I'm not sure which one. We would prefer 2030, but if it's 2027, or maybe they'll compromise in between. Transitional kindergarten, this impacts all districts. There was a bill that was heard earlier this week. Several folks testified on this bill. It's an improvement. It does cap the funding for a year or two, but it will allow, if you have TK, to continue it. If you're thinking about adding TK, you may have to slow down a little bit. We won't know until the session's over, until hopefully this bill has been incorporated into, I believe, the Senate budget. And this is the one that, the reason it's been improved is there's some language that was added for OSPI to do a study, work with, I think the Department of Children, Youth and Families and DCYF, and then come up with some recommendations to increase the enrollment in TTK no more than 5%. And I think that's a good thing. And it also prioritizes, has a list of priorities. The first one obviously was access to available daycare, which in almost every community is pretty slim. In some communities, there's non-existent, especially some small rural districts. I'll send this PowerPoint to Marissa, but this is just a list that I pulled off the information that was included in the information for legislators during the hearing. It was provided by OSPI, but it's as of March 2025, and it shows the current number of transitional kindergarten students in those districts offering it. So my understanding was that this bill does pass and is approved by both House and Senate, and the governor signs it. You would be able to continue TTK if you currently have it, but if you don't have it, you're going to have to wait. And then again, the current bill 5769, which is a vehicle for transitional kindergarten currently in the legislature, passed the Senate, and it's currently in the House. There was a hearing, as I mentioned the other day, and then my prediction is this one will pass. I'm hoping it will. The good news is it's not going to be. They're not going to eliminate transitional kindergarten, which they could, because it's not considered basic education, but it is a great program. There's another bill. It's going to be heard today, this afternoon, House Appropriations. And this is a bill. Some of these bills don't have to worry about the deadlines because they're NCIB, necessary to implement the budget. And it does a couple things. I think Marissa's talked about this before, but it changes the apportionment schedule. It's kind of a shell game, moving things around because the state budget starts July 1st, school district's budget starts September 1st. So the legislature can move the apportionment around. It's scheduled for a hearing later today, this afternoon. It also, there's a number of districts that, I think it's about 10 districts, mostly are small rural districts that have a really high percentage of ALE students. And if they have more than 33% of their enrollment ALE, their LEA, levy equalization, if they get levy equalization, is reduced by 33%. And this is just a list of those districts that will be impacted. Boitsford could lose as much as $8 million, or excuse me, that's a total. Boitsford, 111,000, Goldendale, 2 million, Mary Kay Knight, 600,000, OMAC, 4 million. These are big numbers for small districts. The thinking is, wow, this seems odd if you're worried about the high number of ALE. And these are districts that are following the current rules, and they're offering ALE programs statewide. Students enroll in their district, and they often have a provider helping with the instruction. But it's legal, it's appropriate in some cases. Why they're punishing these districts, I'm not sure. And then the other thing in 2050, this is the apportionment changes. And as you know, it's interesting that, of course, in May and I think November, we get only 5% of the apportionment, assuming that districts are going to pass levies, even though levies are not, you're not required to have a levy. Most districts do, but we currently get 22.5% of your total budget. Apportionment comes in July and August when you don't have school. Seems a little crazy to me. Now, if this bill passes, it would move it to 25%. And this is going to create some cash flow problems for districts to make payroll and to pay all their bills on certain months where it's pretty slim. And some counties are not going to loan money. So districts may have to go out to a bank and try to find money for a short-term loan. Capital budget proposals, Tyler's going to talk about those. I did put a link in here. You can click on that and get the different links. Marissa mentioned the capital budget. Capital budget is, I think, a little bit healthier than the operating budget. And there is considerable dollars put in for some grants, including the small district modernization grants and some other grants. And there is some language in the particularly impacting small districts that get the modernization grants, if they do get those. In the past, they've been able to qualify for some SCAP, School Construction Census Program money. And there's language in both the House and Senate capital budget proposals. They would not be able to do that. So we're working against that. This was something I shared recently in a rural ed center. These are just some of the bills that are going through. The big two is kind of, the big three is now the big two. Hopefully it'll stay the big two because, as Marissa's pointed out, the House budget doesn't fund an increase in MSOCs at all. Marissa, how am I doing on time? And is Tyler there? Because I want to be quiet to give Tyler plenty of time.
Thanks, Jim. Tyler is here. He managed his Zoom shenanigans, but you've got a few minutes left, five or 10.
Okay, so I think I've talked about most of these. What's interesting is once in a while I will go on the Washington State House Democrats website and see what's going on there, and then I'll go on the Washington State House Republicans website, and it's almost like two different realities. And a reason I do that is just to see where both caucuses are coming from. And again, the House Democrats aren't necessarily completely aligned with the Senate Democrats and vice versa. But simple majority for school bonds, probably, even though there was a lot of action in that, we went from 55% to 50%, simple majority plus, but it would mean a loss of impact fees. That bill did not pass. I don't think they're going to put it in the budget, but so I think this will be a topic again for next session. I could talk a lot more, but I think I'm going to stop to give time for Tyler.
Thanks, Jim. That was an awesome overview. Thank you so much for doing that. I did have a couple questions before we pass it off to Tyler. If you wouldn't mind, a little bit of more information on 5009, the transportation bill from Ron. Would it require the additional driver training if the vehicles, not a yellow bus, are purchased using those funds? Not exactly sure what they mean by that, but maybe you know better.
Well, there is some training required, and it's this similar training to what the bus drivers go through, like how to evacuate a bus. There's annual training that bus drivers have to undergo, and my understanding is that school employees, which could include coaches, um, but mainly those school employees who will be driving kids to and from school, are going to have that training. They're not going to be required to get their CDL. As far as the cost of that, I don't think the district would just have to come up with a cost to train those employees. I believe that's correct. This again is optional. Districts don't have to do it, but in some cases you can't find a driver, and your kids need to get home. And if you've got a Suburban or a van, you can get them home. And again, the advantage of this bill is you'll be able to get depreciation for a school Suburban or car or van. We've never been able to do that before. I hope that answers the question.
I think so. Thank you, Jim. I appreciate that. Then I had one other question. I think you and I and Tyler might all have a read on this, so I'm curious what the two of you think. But the question is whether or not that apportionment shift will pass. And my thought, or what I've been told, even though there's only a House Bill 2050 that you reviewed, Jim, there is also language that's similar in the Senate budget. They were a little sneakier about hiding it, sort of embedding it within the budget. Timelines are different for both, but both are consequential to districts because we actually have that trickery, I guess we'll call it, in both the House and the Senate. We have been told that if you see something actually paralleled in some way, even conceptually, between the House and the Senate, because that's such a rare situation this session, something probably is going to happen in that direction. Do you have a different read, Jim? Or Tyler, do you want to step in here?
I'm interested to hear what Tyler said. I think we're gonna see some kind of apportionment change. I think it's gonna help the legislators balance the budget. And again, their budget year starts July 1st. Yeah, I think we've seen this before, so I think we're gonna see something. It is kind of a shell game. It's moving stuff around, charging it to different fiscal years. But since both the Senate one, I think, is only for a couple years and it reverts back. If I remember right, the House one would stay permanent. But I think we're going to see something. They are under strain because of the projected shortfall in funding, and they're looking under every nook and cranny. I am grateful that they're not looking at cutting or eliminating transitional kindergarten, even though when the session's over, they could come out of their closed door meetings and say, and throw out the budget, which we have less than 24 hours to look at, as both of you know. But that's my rambling on what I think is going to happen.
Appreciate it. Yeah, none of us are Nostradamus around here, so it's anybody's guess. But uh, there's some signals that something is probably going to happen in that regard. That's a good segue to Tyler. Tyler, you want to start with that? Anything additional to add about apportionment shifts? And then you can talk about other fun stuff like capital budgets and school.
Well, thank you. And thank you for your grace while my computer was spinning out of control. I think my computer's been following the legislature because it just can't take it anymore and it's shutting itself off. And Jim, thank you for covering for me as well. I would actually agree with everything Jim just said. I think a shell game is the perfect way to describe this situation. And I think every budget cutting mechanism is on the table right now. We're seeing, that Gildon bill that goes and takes money from districts that accepted a grant last year. I mean, that kind of stuff is unheard of. And I think this apportionment shift is another tool and another game they can play. And I absolutely think it's on the table. I expect it, and I hope we can at least mitigate the harmful effects of it, and try and make it as workable as possible. So yeah, thank you, Marissa. I am going to share a spreadsheet with you all. I'm sorry to share a spreadsheet. I like to do PowerPoints, but with the budgets coming out this week, I just haven't had time. And so I will walk you through the spreadsheet and explain what everything is. But if you're like me, you need to see the numbers in order to process them, which is why I'm going to put it up here. So the first thing I want to do is highlight the total amounts are in the yellow. They use a variety of different buckets to fund us. So you really just want to focus on these yellow columns. This is the House capital budget that you see represented here, and this is the Senate capital budget. So I'll just go through and we can look at the differences in each. The first thing and the big thing is that the school construction assistance program is fully funded in both budgets. That's something we anticipate. It's not something that surprises us. If this was not fully funded, that would be very concerning and very surprising. But this is a fully funded program. I would just point out that you can see this is a $563 million appropriation. And when I started working at OSPI, we were running like 800 million, 900 million, even in excess of $1 billion. And so the reason this number is so low, even though it's fully funded, is because of the abysmal bond and levy passages statewide. If you can't pass a bond, you can't participate in the SCAP program. And then the legislature gets to pocket that money. So the legislature is directly benefiting in some ways from your bond failures, because it means that's less money that they have to put into the school construction assistance program and more money that can be spent on housing, on environmental projects, on behavioral health, whatever they need it for. So all in all, we're pleased with the SCAP number, but ultimately that should be much higher, and it's being artificially dragged down by the unconstitutional supermajority requirement that we have on bonds. Last year, I think a lot of you are aware, we have a cost per square foot we allocate. And last year, OSPI worked with the Senate to increase that number. This year, we put forward a modest increase again. The House and the Senate did not pick that up, but that's not surprising because they made a substantial increase to this last year. So they kind of like to fund things and then move on to other things before they return to the things they funded in the first place. So we're going to keep chipping away at getting that number up. We got it up $100 last year, as I said, but focused really on small district modernization and school seismic safety. So to talk about small district modernization, I am pleased with the appropriation. The House proposes effectively $250 million and the Senate $202 million. You can look at this as a win or a loss, depending on what lens you use. I personally think this is a win, and I'll explain why. This program started in like 2019 with a $20 million appropriation. So, for the next 3 or 4 years, we were getting $20 million at a time. And now that we've shown the success of the program, they're much more comfortable investing large amounts of money in it. So each year, we've seen increased investments in this program. So Governor Inslee, on his way out the door, proposed funding this program at $333 million, which is great. It's a ton of money. However, the governor didn't really put that much into seismic, so we did need to see some of the funding go there. Nonetheless, I think a $250 million appropriation is pretty good, and I'm pretty pleased with the Senate's number. Again, we're going to keep working to increase those appropriations every year. You can look at it as a loss if you say, well, we went down from Governor Inslee's level, but I think you could definitely look at it as a major win if you consider it in the context of the past 5 years. So moving on, and I'm sorry if you have questions, I'm not seeing them. I will look at them all at the end.
I'll track those for you, Tyler, so you don't even need to worry about it.
Thank you, thank you. All right, so school seismic safety, 151 million in the House and 143 million in the Senate. Those are both based off models provided by OSPI. I expect that final number will be about 153 million, and that should cover 3 projects out on the coast, the complete relocation of 2 school buildings out of a tsunami inundation zone. That would be Cape Flattery and Tohola. And then we also have a project at North Beach, building a tsunami evacuation tower for the students there. So with that $150 million appropriation, I believe we should be able to fund those 2 relocations and the tsunami tower installation. Ultimately, we were trying to get these 2 big coastal projects funded. They've been sort of a black eye that we couldn't get past because of the large appropriation attached to them, but really happy that both chambers stepped up to fund this and protect our kids. Similarly, another great program that prioritizes student health and safety is the school district health and safety grant. $38 million appropriation from the House and a $31 million appropriation from the Senate. This is for urgent and emergency repairs, fire, flooding, something of that nature. It's important that money be available to districts even when the legislature is not in session, because as we know, disasters can happen even when the legislature is not in session, and we don't want them to have to come back to get you money. So this is a bucket of money that we can sit on, and it is essentially first come, first serve for a disaster that could occur this year. Career preparation and launch grants, often called CTE grants, CTE equipment grants, $5 million in the House, and it looks like $4 million in the Senate. The skill centers had a rough year. I think, in the capital budget, the investments this year were in the Small District Modernization Grant Program and the School Seismic Safety Grant Program. We have a prioritized list of skill center projects. Skill centers do not receive any dedicated capital funding, and so they are at the mercy of their host district to perform any capital repairs. We think that the legislature should develop a dedicated grant program to serve skill centers so that they don't end up at the mercy of this list every year. But with that said, the top project on their list is a $50 million project, and so it has sort of slowed down the progress of the entire list. You can see some investment, oh, never mind, those are previous investments, so no investments in the poor skill centers this time, but we are having conversations with the Senate right now about setting up a dedicated program for them. And I know that their association and their lobbyists are meeting with capital budget writers right now about how to fund that West Sound Skill Center project. I'll highlight distressed schools. This is essentially a placeholder. If you're a legislator and you have a little project that you need to get taken care of, this is kind of where they get placed. So these are a handful of projects that were important to legislators. You can see a lot of these are in the Puget Sound area. And then the House did a version of this too. I don't know how they will merge these, but I imagine all these projects will receive funding. And we're working to help the Inchelium School District get their funding because they have been having a hard time cobbling their grants together, which they are allowed to do under law. Finally, the last thing I would add is this funds our capital program administration. That's important to me. That's part of my salary. So always happy to receive that in the budget. But overall, we're quite pleased with this budget. I would say this, I think there's a variety of ways you can look at this budget. If you look at the amount of investment that's been made in capital in K-12 over the past 4 or 5 years, that number has been increasing. We have been increasing our investments in K-12 over time. So I think that's a win. What also has been increasing investments over time is the housing sector and the environmental sector. And candidly, I am in direct competition with those on behalf of public schools. So we do want to refocus the legislature on their paramount duty. And I know that the court said that perhaps capital is not part of that, but the court did signal that they aren't off the hook and that there's a lot of work to be done. And we want to keep working with the legislature to increase the investments in K-12 and perhaps recenter the legislature on its paramount duty rather than all these other things that are extremely important, but are not the paramount duty, to be totally frank. All in all, happy with the budget, happy with the school seismic safety number, and we'll see what we get.
Thank you so much, Tyler. I don't see any Q&As right now, so I'm going to give folks just a few minutes to think about what they want to know more about. In the meantime, let's play Nostradamus for a second. There was huge hope for simple majority this past session, at least among some. I don't know if you were so hopeful. You were more of a realist through all of it. And we would have needed 3 Republicans to support that measure in order to get it through. Has to pass a supermajority with the legislature, and in order to get it to the ballot to get a simple majority. Did I get that right?
Yeah, you did.
Yeah. So what's it going to take, Tyler? What's it going to take to get simple majority, in your opinion? I mean, is it some? We're never going to give up on it, obviously, but what's the magic recipe?
Politically recentering both major parties. No, just kidding. I
We
mean,
should
if
be
we
able
could
to do
just
that
do
by
that, I
next
think,
year. Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
it's a interim project. No, jokes aside, I do think right now in small communities throughout Washington, um, there's a lot of frustration with property tax value or property taxes. And I know the legislature is looking at increasing those right now. And I don't think that's a winning message. And I think that the legislature right now has tied us to these tax increase proposals. And I don't really appreciate that. They could fund K-12 without all these tax increases. And I think the only way we ever get Republicans onto the side of supporting a simple majority is if we show some sort of fiscal restraint at the state level. And right now, that is certainly not happening, as you can see between the conversation between the legislature and Governor Ferguson. Republicans will need to feel safe going home to their small communities and not getting yelled at when they walk into the gas station or the convenience store by their constituents because they voted for a property tax increase. Until that dynamic changes, we're stuck in this spot.
It's a fair assessment. Thank you for your honesty.
Sorry. And I saw a question.
Yeah,
Can
the
you
question,
oh,
about the green buildings requirements and Department of Health or Board of Health rules.
I think it's really dangerous to be totally candid with you. I mean, it's also really dangerous to leave your buildings neglected. So I appreciate what the Department of Health is doing. But I think the green buildings requirements are very difficult for a lot of districts to meet. They're an unfunded mandate. I know that Commerce has a bill out there for some sort of exemption and grace period. I haven't looked into it that much, and candidly, I'm not sure I have any faith in it, even if I did read something that was supposed to make me feel better. The DOH rules is another really concerning thing to me right now. Of course, it's a priority of this agency, the superintendent and myself as a personal member of society to make sure that our school buildings are safe. Again, though, we don't want to be shutting down schools and school operations and taking parents out of the workplace over something that could be pretty arbitrary. I can give you an example of that. Right now, let's say you have a water fountain in your school that tests positive for lead. I would argue that we could turn off the water and board up the fountain and move on with our life. I think people at DOH would argue that that's not good enough, that that whole hallway needs to be cordoned off. And students shouldn't be in the building where there's access to lead, even though the faucet is shut off. I'm not going to pretend to know all that science, but that's a very big difference and a very, very big nuance. And even though I agree when DOH says we shouldn't let students have access to some lead contaminated contraption, I think our my opinion would be as long as you're not within 5 feet of it, we're good. And DOH, I think they want you out of the building entirely. So they are really pursuing the most stringent rules possible. I was on board with the idea of pursuing stringent rules because that's the task we were given. But then a amendment appeared in the House of Representatives on the operating budget last week that specifies that these rules will go into effect very shortly and that they won't be funded. If you do that, you will shut down buildings throughout Southwest Washington, throughout the Puget Sound region, throughout Eastern Washington, throughout Peninsula, throughout the whole state. And I think we need to be really careful before we shut down schools willy-nilly based on the recommendations of the State Board of Health, to be totally candid with you. So um, we got to be careful. I think we need flexibility to administer the rules in ways that are practical for school operations. And I also think we need some funding attached to that.
Yeah, I mean, thanks for that overview. The checks and balances that were currently in place essentially required the Department of Health to go through the legislature, and the legislature then had to fund any recommendations from the Board of Health before those rules could go into effect, impacting school districts' operations. This amendment, as you pointed out, removes those checks and balances. So instead, the Board of Health, who is trying to do the right thing for the well-being of Washingtonians, we totally understand that, get to skip the process by which the legislature has to be held accountable for funding those rules,
Yep.
which means the cost comes to districts again. So.
And it's totally regressive. I mean, that's the other thing. This amendment is coming out of Seattle, who can go into their local levy to fund all these things. What happens to Wahkiakum? What happens to these small districts when you place an unfunded mandate on them? They're going to shut down.
Yeah.
And that's what I think we got to be real careful of.
Well, we're seeing what's happening. The accumulation of unfunded mandates and underfunded mandates are shuttering our schools. So, oh, just don't get me going, Tyler. We
I
got another
know.
question, and I don't know the answer to this. I've never even heard it proposed. Maybe you know. Can citizens propose an initiative for simple majority, or does it have to follow the process of going through the legislature? Do you know, Tyler?
Well, I know that a citizen can start an initiative. I mean, that's how we ended up in the position we were in. I think you have to meet certain requirements, like a certain amount of signatures before the legislature necessarily decides to review that. I don't know what the mechanism is that forces the legislature to conduct a review. But I am pretty sure any citizen can start petitioning for a ballot referendum. Yeah, I do believe that's true. I need to double check, but I mean, like from an American, point of view, like that seems very much like something we would value, right? Allowing people to petition their government freely. So I imagine we have that protection, at least currently. So
That's great. Thanks, Tyler. It's so funny because on the panelist list, I thought Michelle Choate, one of our colleagues, were asking the questions. It's actually Jim Kowalkowski.
ah, okay.
So Jim asked a question about green buildings. Jim, do you want to come back on and ask or answer what you think you know the answer to that question?
Nope, muted.
In regards to the initiative question, I'm not a lawyer, but I pretend to be one sometimes. The state constitution is really clear to change, and it was changed, I think, in the 40s. And we did have simple majority for bonds for schools, and then it got changed. But the state constitution clearly defines to change that requirement requires the legislature, 2/3 majority in both the House and Senate, to vote for a change for a simple majority, say for school bonds, and then it goes to the people for a simple majority. So the people will have the final say. And we did this years ago on the simple majority for levies. I think a citizen could do an initiative to get the legislature to take a look at it, but I don't think an initiative can change the state constitution. But I could be wrong. Is that helpful or not, Marissa?
Well, it's worth us exploring and getting a definitive answer for our members. Doesn't hurt to ask, doesn't hurt to try, I suppose.
I know there was a question about the governor's emergency powers during COVID, his executive order that has the impact of law. And again, there's wording in the state constitution about that. And I know there was some discussion about an initiative, but I think that was looked at and found that you got to change the state constitution, and that takes legislative authority. But again, that may be again, I'm not an attorney. I need to go to law school to give a better answer.
We'll figure it out in time for sure. Thank you both for that. All the questions have been answered in the Q&A. Is there anything that the two of you wish you would have said, but you didn't get a chance to, that's appropriate for our audience? Thought of something that you didn't include in your messaging?
I want to,
Yeah,
I'd
Jim,
like
you
to
go.
I'd like to thank Tyler for his work on behalf of all school districts. His work on the SCAP program, his work on the different grants has helped lots of districts, big and small, urban, rural, all across the state. He's been a champion for that. And I think and OSBI and Chris Rickdall, even though I know some folks may have different viewpoints on the job Chris is doing, it's a tough job. But Chris and his team has been very supportive of capital improvements. I also think it's looking like special ed is going to get some funding, which is real needed. That will help districts. But Tyler, I just want to thank you for all the work that you do. You're very accessible and you're a strong advocate for students all across this state.
Thank you, Jim. It means the most to hear compliments from people like you and Marissa. And I don't just say that. I mean, you guys walk the walk, and that's who I like to hear that from. In that very vein, I did want to flag one more issue that affects small districts that is gnawing at me. And I just want to make sure we're all tracking it. There was language put in the budget that specifies that you cannot combine small district modernization grants with SCAP grants. This is something that Senator Schessler is now telling people that they are breaking the rules if they're using a small district modernization grant to combine with a SCAP project. I want to be clear. We are not breaking rules. This is something defined in RCW. It's in RCW 525, I believe 159, 5B. And small districts should be fighting for their ability to keep this mechanism so that we can give out more capital money. Just want to make sure that's on everyone's radar.
Thanks for that, Tyler. If we were to quote unquote fight that, what would be the approach you would recommend?
It's being fought right now in my inbox, actually. So as we are talking, I just got a message from Yasmin Trudeau asking me, is there any truth to this? So I am starting to push back. I will be sending out a message to you all today with the language just to make sure you're aware of it. And I mean, I think we should ask for it to be removed.
Great, that's really helpful. If you can get that to me sooner
I will.
rather than later, I can put it in the Friday InSession publication, so our folks are aware of it. Thank you for that signal.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, we might be able to let y'all go a little bit earlier unless there are any additional questions. We got some thank yous in the Q&A. And I just want to thank the two of you. You both make doing this work not just more fun, but also right now it just feels more bearable. We're not looking for fun. We're just looking for getting through. I think as I told members before we started the session, we're going to ask for everything that we need. We're not going to get all of it. We're going to get something. And then we're going to focus again on the interim on continuing to identify what we need and asking for it. That always feels exhausting and frustrating, particularly at this point in the legislative session. But I will tell you, it's absolutely what we do every single year. We have yet to see a legislative session where we asked for everything we needed and they gave it all to us. So this is part of the work, and we're not alone. Other sectors have the exact same struggle, and they don't have the benefit of being the paramount duty. Imagine not being the paramount duty, how much you come up short every time. So it's a hard job to be in the legislature. It's a hard job to be a school director and a superintendent, and grateful for everything you all are doing for our kids. Jim, any closing thoughts?
Yeah, no, well said, Marissa. the only thing I would add to that is, and I shared this in a recent Zoom. I found a picture of it was a barefoot metal pedal to the gas, because you've even said it's time to keep the pedal to the metal. And I do think, and I guess my plea is to those of, because most of the board directors on this are the legislative liaisons for their board, and make that extra call or that text or email. But I think calls really help, because during the hearings, you see the legislators checking their email. I'm sure that's what, maybe that's, they're doing other stuff, but they're checking their phones or their emails. But if you can leave a message or do an email saying, in regards to your district, what you need, because all of you need help with resources. We need less unfunded mandates, but we need more funding, particularly for special ed and for MSOCs. And if they can make those two things a priority, but don't underestimate the power of an extra phone call or an email or a text. And if 20 or 30 or 40 or 50 people are just like you as a school board director, if someone's polite and courteous, but they're persistent and they don't let up and they have a great cause, because whether they're first graders or seniors or middle school kids, it's been fun to see the kids testify on hearings, the students testify, but third graders, second graders, transitional kindergarten kids aren't really testifying, but they need somebody to advocate for them. And I think that's our job to do that. So don't hesitate in these last few weeks to reach out if you have a special connection with a legislator, and let them know what you need in your district to help things better for your kids.
Thanks, Jim. That's a good reminder. It is 100% true. This is a fact that if you don't make a call, it won't make a difference. That's for sure. All right. So with that, we're going to give you 12 minutes back in your time. Thank you again, Jim and Tyler, for being thoughtful colleagues and great leaders in this effort. And we'll see you all next time. Thank you so much